Hey there, Anomalies. Welcome to another episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk to Travis Sherry.
There's a lot of podcasts. There's people making very good money.
We're going to talk about his humble beginnings as an English teacher in Japan, how his mother influenced him in his life, how he loves extra bags of peanuts, and how he became the #1 travel podcaster on iTunes. Enjoy the show. Travis on here for all you anomalies out there is that he also started as a teacher. He started as many other things, but he started as a teacher. For those of you who are into traveling and mile hacking, he has the #1 travel podcast on iTunes right now. Congrats, Trav.
Thank you. 300 and whatever 90 episodes later. Yeah, we've done a lot of them.
So that only took you a few weeks, right? I mean,
right.
Almost, that's an overnight success.
That's right. Overnight success sitting right here.
And for if you want a little bit of details about Trav, some fun facts, he loves birds and he hates ice cream. Ain't that right, Trav?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Love birds. Can't stand. I never eat ice cream.
Of course.
That's why I put on 20 pounds in the last year and a half. Right.
Oh, never mind. I read that wrong. I'm looking at it. Apparently he hates birds and loves ice cream. I guess that makes a little bit more sense.
It certainly does.
Thanks, Trav, for coming on.
I'm super excited to talk about this because for me, education and the idea of being a teacher was, we're going to get into it, was just what I envisioned would be my life. Like I just thought I was going to be a lifelong teacher. My mom was a teacher, and that's what I imagined I would be until I had some, stumbles along the road and found myself in this world of online education and entrepreneurship. And obviously that's taken a bunch of different paths. But yeah, I love the idea of teaching, and having come from that background, it's fun to talk to someone, Ray, and to people out there listening who also understand the value of education, but also see what it is from the other side of someone who's been in the trenches as a teacher.
Well, that's exactly. So tell me a little bit more about that. You say you have a background in teaching. You thought you were going to be a teacher most of your life, it sounds like.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, my mom was a teacher. She was a middle school, health and phys ed teacher. If anyone ever gets into teaching, come on, that's the best gig out there, right? That like a librarian, if you like reading, she never had a plan. She just went outside and played sports with kids, but she was a teacher. And I really enjoyed my high school experience. I enjoyed being in school. I enjoyed learning. I certainly wasn't like an A++ student, but I really loved the engagement with my teachers and with other kids, and was very social. And so I enjoyed that. And I went to school specifically to get an education degree, which I did get, and just thought, hey, this is a pretty cool job. Like, it's not your typical 9 to 5, you get summers off. There's a bit more freedom in a way than maybe a cubicle job. And I learned that the bit more freedom was certainly not enough freedom for me. But that was just what I thought I was going to do. And so I went in and I taught high school history and special education for 3 years after I graduated from university, and quickly realized that I did enjoy teaching and I enjoyed being around other people. But the things I hated were waking up at like 6:30 or 7 a.m. I hated waking up early. And, teachers, especially if you're a high school teacher, it's, you're waking up fairly early. Hated that. Hated wearing a shirt and tie, hated teaching a subject that I wasn't super passionate about. I like some of it, but I didn't love teaching, for example, let's say like European history, but I loved maybe current events. So there's a bit there. So I wanted to teach what I wanted to teach. And I didn't really like being told what to do. And the education is, if people are teachers, they think people realize it's skewing, unfortunately, more and more towards, hey, just teach this. Like, you don't have much autonomy. It's like teach to the test. And I didn't like that. And so 3 years in, I thought, there's no way I'm making it 30 years. Like, I'm already bored and a bit burnt out. So I better find something else to do.
Were you teaching in public or private school at that point?
Public school. And I was actually at a vocational school. So it was a bit different because the kids there were going to learn a trade. So carpentry, culinary, cosmetology, all C's. I don't know how that happened. And then half the day they were taking their academics. So they certainly most kids certainly weren't at my school for the academic portion. So that made it a little tough too. Like I knew they weren't coming in and super jazzed to learn about social studies and history. And, had I been at a traditional high school, yeah, maybe the kids would have been a little more interested in what I was teaching. But I'm sure I would have felt those same things bubbling up of just like, yeah, I don't want to do this for 30 years. There's no way.
And how did that lead you into podcasting then? Because that's a pretty big jump. So what were the steps that took you from I'm in teaching, I'm getting bored here, I'm going to start recording my voice and sharing it with the world?
Okay. So yeah, I doubt anyone's going to follow my exact pattern because it's far from linear, but to make a long story somewhat short, I was teaching in that vocational school 3 years in. I was like, this is not for me, or at least I just don't want to keep doing this. So let me see what I can do. And I went back and got a master's degree because I said, if I can get a scholarship where I get my master's degree paid for, I'm going to do that. And I really like sports. So I assumed that. So I went and got a master's degree in a year in sports management and kind of assumed that I would get back into the educational field a bit because I liked it as being like an athletic director of a high school or a university. So again, staying in like the educational realm, just moving into something that I enjoyed more with the sports and more of an administrative role. I did that. I did that for a year, and I ended up deciding that I wanted to travel a bit. So I took a job, an internship in Switzerland with the International Baseball Federation. I did that for 5 months. So I was like driving baseballs around Europe and running tournaments for Europeans who didn't know anything about baseball. And at that moment, I thought I was going to get into sports, but I realized that I loved the travel part. And so when I came home from that internship, the easiest way for me to go abroad again was to go back into teaching. And this is an interesting way, and I think a really cool way for a lot of people who are interested in breaking out a little bit to experience something different, but still stay within their, like, maybe their degree or their zone of expertise in teaching. I went and I taught English as a second language in Japan. So I moved to Japan. I taught English in a public high school there, also a vocational school. So also kids who didn't care again. That's why they put me there. Like, yeah, this is the lowest level school in Japan. We know you've been in other schools like that, so you can handle the quote unquote riffraff in Japan, the kids who are
Was
riffraff.
that the JET program?
Yeah, I went through the JET program. Yep.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, it's the Japanese English teacher. We'll put a little link in the show notes if anybody else wants to go to Japan, like Travis.
Yep. It was fascinating. It was a great experience. I knew nothing about Asia. I'd never been to Asia. My wife had never been to Asia. She went through a company called Interact, which is a private company that does a lot of the same things as JET, which is the public one because it's run by the Japanese government. And we spent 2 years there teaching English and knew that it was only going to be a year or two. That, like, we didn't go thinking we were going to move to Japan or anything like that. We went for the adventure of a new experience and got paid halfway decent, same as you would probably as a teacher in the US. But we're living somewhere new, took the opportunity to travel all around Asia while we were there. I can't say the work was super thrilling because, again, I was in a very low-level school, so the kids didn't care about English as much. But it was a great experience and one that I would highly recommend to people who are saying, I might not want to go off and be a complete entrepreneur right now or start my own thing, but I do want to get out and see something different. I thought teaching English abroad, specifically for me in Japan, was an amazing opportunity to do that. And so we did that for 2 years. And while I was in Japan, kind of the second year, I knew we were going to leave, in the next year. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I looked at teaching in an international school, got a kick butt offer from the international school in Rio de Janeiro. I had a friend who was teaching there. They were going to give me a condo in Ipanema Beach. They're going to pay me like $60K a year. You got Brazilian and US holidays off. Like, it was about as good an international school job as you could ask for, especially just starting out kind of in that field. And I just remember saying, yeah, but what if I don't want to live in Brazil for 2 years? Because it was a 2-year contract. And at that point I realized, this is about as much freedom as you're going to get in the teaching realm. If you're staying and being employed by someone else, what are you going to do? And that's when I decided to start my blog. And then a year later, start the podcast, because I thought I want to teach some people something that I really want to teach, which was travel and how to use your frequent flyer miles and travel cheaper and better and all that kind of stuff. And that's why the blog and then the podcast came about, because I did enjoy teaching, I just wanted to teach a subject that I loved. I wanted to be able to do it from anywhere. I wanted to not have to wear a shirt and tie. I didn't want to wake up to an alarm clock. Like all those things I hated, I wanted to get rid of, but I still wanted to teach something. And that's where we are now. Well, that was like 7 years ago. And, it's taken on various forms now, but still teaching, right? It's just something, it's just a different subject matter.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for this important announcement. Are you suffering from chronic teacheritis? Do you suffer from regular outbreaks of, "This is not why I became a teacher. I can't make ends meet on a teacher's salary," or "Why do I have to use this useless material for my students?" Then a weekly dose of the Anomalous Educator podcast could be the pseudo-magical solution you are looking for. It has unscientifically been proven to help teachers cure teacheritis and learn how to make a side income, or replace their entire income by teaching online using methods they know are best without having to use some government-mandated material. It has also been shown to provide more free time to spend with friends and family. To report your case of teacheritis today, please log on to the website www.anomalouseducator.com or subscribe to this podcast. The Anomalous Educator podcast is most effective if taken with a glass of wine after a hard day at school. Warning! Side effects may include sudden urges to quit your jobs, travel the world, and start improving educational systems and lives of students everywhere. Please consult your physician before starting. We now return to our regularly scheduled programming.
So how did you go about starting your podcast? So you woke up, you're like, okay, I know you started with a blog. So you obviously knew some people were interested in what you were saying because you wrote your blog, and I'm assuming you had some traffic there. What steps did you take to start a podcast? You just go out and buy a mic and start recording, or what?
Yes. I mean, podcasting was a much smaller then, and there wasn't really, there was probably courses on how to podcast, but very, very few. I just really found that I enjoyed listening to podcasts when I was in Japan because I was biking to work like 45 minutes each day, and I throw a podcast in my way to work and a podcast on my way back. I'm just like, this is really cool. So I searched for my niche, travel podcasts, and didn't find any that I loved because no one it was all about destinations. No one was like interviewing just the people who were traveling and pulling out the stories of like the person who's writing the blog or the guy who's traveling to all 195 countries. Or, I thought, man, there's a lot of stories behind the people who are doing this. And so I didn't find one that I really jived with. And I thought I could do this. I like talking to people. And so selfishly, I was like, I'm going to start a podcast because I had a list of like 15, 20 people who I thought were really interesting. And I'm like, well, how am I going to like get a conversation with these people? I'm not just going to cold email and be like, you want to hop on the phone call? It's like, well, if I start a podcast and ask them to be interviewed, that might work. And I didn't know how to do it really. I just said, I'm going to get a mic and I'm going to hop on Skype and I'm going to start recording with people. And that was kind of it. I just wanted to talk with them. And, I've read like a blog post about how to actually do the tech side of it, but I didn't worry about that too much. I just said, let me just start recording with people. Let me get on Skype. Let me get this $20 call recorder. And let me just start creating this content and seeing if I even enjoy it as much as I think I will, which I have, 500 episodes across a few podcasts later. So that is how I started. Just, I want to talk to people. No one's doing exactly what I want to do. Let me get a mic and let me start going.
So how did you reach out to those people in the beginning when, for example, right now you have the number one travel podcast in the world. You reach out to people, they probably know who you are, especially if they're in the travel world, before you reach out to them. Somebody just starting off, what would you recommend to them to like get those first people on there to kind of get the ball rolling?
Yeah, for sure. It was harder in some ways and easier in some ways. It was harder because not a lot of people actually knew what a podcast was. And it's so weird to say now, but before Serial and NPR started getting the podcast game, I'd be like, hey, do you want to record I have a podcast? And a lot of people would actually say, what is that? And I'd have to say, well, it's like when you DVR your TV and you can watch it anytime. It's like that for radio. We're just recording and we're going to put it out and someone can listen to it. It's not live. It's just a recorded thing. And they're like, okay. So that was why it was harder, but it was easier also because there was less people doing it. So less people were getting requests for it. It was kind of a unique thing. That being said, I think the best way to go about it is just to find people that you like. And, my pitch is always, hey, do you want to come on and talk about yourself for an hour? And I give them a little bit more background, but I say, like, we've got this podcast. We're trying to tell cool stories. Like, we want to hear your story. And do you want to talk about yourself? And you'll find that most people, I mean, unless you're reaching out to really just hard to even get in contact with people, top tier people, most people are going to be like, yeah, that's cool. I'll come on and talk about myself. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them, and so either that's giving them some like kind of framework in the beginning, but you don't want to ask them to do too much. And that's why I'd always say, like, hey, just come on and talk about yourself. I didn't say, like, hey, here are the 15 questions I'm going to ask you, because then they start to think this might be hard. I present it in a nice, easy manner. And yeah, I would just reach out to people you like. And certainly if you have a list of 20 people you want to interview and there's like 5 that are going to be very hard to get on, then start with the people that you think are easier, get your feet wet, get some going. And then if you reach out to those harder to get people and they see you have a podcast, you have 15, 20 episodes, whatever, you have some reviews, it's a real thing versus, oh, I'm starting a podcast, I have nothing to show you, do you want to come on? That might be a little bit of a harder sell.
So you recommend kind of getting some easy interviews in there and then reaching out to the bigger players, I say, after that. So at least you have a website, you have some things in place so that people know you're legit. You're just not somebody who's,
who might just say, I want to do a podcast, and then it never goes anywhere. Like, that's the thing that people probably don't want to see is, oh, I recorded and now it's never even coming out, because then it's a waste of everyone's time. So yeah, go for some easier people in the beginning. It's also going to help you cut your teeth a little bit. Another thing you could do is, if you've seen someone on other people's podcasts, and even if they're a bigger name, you at least know they've been on other shows, so they're willing to go on certain podcasts. And so you might say, hey, I always try to make it personal. Like, I saw you on this podcast, love the interview. Here's why mine's a little different, because they probably, you want to make sure you're differentiating. Like, we talk about a similar thing, but I want to ask you about this and go off on this theme. So then they know you've done some research about them. They've been on a podcast before, so they're kind of open to that idea as well.
I can definitely back up that experience. I've been on a number of podcasts for the businesses I've run, and some of the less experienced interviewers, one of the things that I've seen them, they ask exactly the same questions. Right. So I joke that I'm actually going to answer, how did I found my first business? I'm going to record the answer on my phone. Every time somebody asks, I'm just going to hit play, so that like every time I'm on a podcast, like exactly the same answer comes out. I'll see how long it takes for people to notice. But yeah, you're exactly right. A lot of the people kind of go out with exactly the same questions when they're reaching out. So anybody wanting to do it, I strongly recommend prep a little, learn a little bit about the person, and make your podcast a little unique. If you're going to start the next, let's say, travel podcast, there needs to be something unique about it, because this will lead into my next question for Travis. It's a lot more saturated field right now than it was when he started 7 years ago. So that leads into my next question. How has podcasting changed in the last 7 years? You mentioned that there's a lot more people doing it, but what else?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that it's mainstream. I mean, that's the biggest change, is that I don't have to explain to anyone what a podcast is anymore. I mean, you look at it, and we did a presentation at a conference called TravelCon. I did one on podcasting, and the podcast is now more searched for in Google than blog. So if you're like there's more searches for, insert your subject here, travel podcast, than there is for travel blog. And so it's exploded. And there's a lot of podcast players. There's a lot of podcasts. There's people making very good money. I mean, only a few. I do want to, that's a misconception that, I can start a podcast and get like crazy rich. I mean, because Joe Rogan can do it. Yeah, well, there's probably 20 people making a lot of money podcasting.
I'm pretty sure Joe Rogan was rich before he started his podcast too.
Right.
That probably helps.
Yeah. There's this kind of funny thing in the industry where people are like, oh, you want to know how to become a famous podcaster? And of course everyone's like, yeah. It's like, become famous, start a podcast. Right. I mean, because you obviously have this built-in community to talk to then. So that's the biggest change, is it has just become so mainstream that you can find podcasts on any topic, that like big companies are getting into the podcast game, or have been in the podcast game now. When I started, it was just basically independent people going at it like me. And now you have NPR who's in there, and kind of these like almost monopolies coming up. They're all buying each other up and, forming this one conglomerate, which is fine because those aren't the ones that I'm really competing against necessarily because they're highly produced. And I think that's a big change too, is the production value has gotten much, much better for most podcasts. When I started, it was like, hey, as long as you had a decent mic that wasn't like your headphone mic or your computers, you sounded better than almost anyone else. And that was my advice for like up until a couple years ago. If people are like, I just, how do I get a good podcast? I'm like, well, practice interviewing. That's going to come. You're going to get better at that. But just make sure you have a decent mic and you'll sound better than everyone else who's sitting there just recording into their computer. Nowadays, there's a lot of stuff that's highly produced. I don't think that's a bad thing because their show is different than my show. Mine is more long form, more conversational, more kind of free flowing. I'm not going against the NPR ones that are like segmented out and almost kind of like how radio was before. That's fine. They have teams of 10, 15, 20 people. They're going for a certain demographic. I'm going for a different one. So the biggest change is it's just way more mainstream. There's a lot more money getting put into it by companies. And I think there's a lot more types of podcasts now. There's really short, snappy 5-minute ones. There's Joe Rogan's 3 hours ones. There's highly produced ones. There's kind of off the cuff ones. And that's cool, because then you find, I always tell people the best piece of advice I can talk about when they say, well, should it be short? Should it be long? I'm like, what do you like to listen to? Whatever you like to listen to, start recreating that. And that's not to say it won't change down the road, but I enjoy ones where people just talk and have conversation. It's not a hard time limit. And so that's kind of what our show is. And then I enjoy short ones. And that's why I started a second show that's timed, so you can make whatever you want. Just make sure it's something that you enjoy doing.
That's a really important point for a lot of the people who listen to the Anomalous Educator and you want to teach online. One of the tenets that we teach here is you want to be able to reach 1,000 people. And I didn't come up with that concept. It's the 1,000 True Fans concept that is used by a lot of people. But the beauty of a podcast and online education in general is that you can reach those 1,000 people in the world who are waiting to hear your voice, your way of teaching. In this case, you're teaching travel hacks in your case, right? But whatever somebody teaches, no matter how small the niche, you only need 1,000 people from Philly, where Travis is right now, to Timbuktu. If there are 1,000 people, you're good. And that's what we like to teach the Anomalous Educator. You don't need to be NPR, 1 million listeners every single month to be successful in podcasting. Now that's going to lead into my other point, because having 1,000 listeners is great. But another thing we're teaching here at the Anomalous Educator is how to make a little bit of money online, whether it's be a side money, you're a teacher and you just need some side income, whether you're an entrepreneur and you want to teach online, you do need to make a little bit of money. It's just the way the world works. I think most teachers, they're sometimes afraid to ask for more money because what's that saying going? How does that saying go? I'm a teacher for the money, said no teacher ever. You don't do it for the money. You do it because you want to give back, but we need to eat. So you mentioned you're not going to make $1 million making podcasts. Podcast builds you an audience. So how do you make money if you have a successful podcast? What are some things you can do?
Yeah, great question. And I think that I struggled with the thing that you were talking about for a while too, coming from a teaching background. Honestly, coming from a background where you don't get paid any more based on how good you are. That's, and that's teaching, that's nursing. That's like a lot of fields where you get into it because you want to help people. It's not really merit-based pay. You work up, it's like years, master degree. Okay, I'm capping out. You can work your way up your salary scale. Much different from the business world. So I struggle with that as well, Ray. I was, you kind of start capping yourself and you say, well, I'm fine with making X amount, 50K, because that's how much I was making teaching. You realize though that A, you have to make money to live and to do the stuff you want to do. And B, what I've come to realize is if I'm doing a good job with what I'm doing, I should be making more. It's almost not that I need more money for myself all the time, but it's a measuring stick to say, hey, if I put out a course and 100 people buy it, okay. If I put out a course and 10,000 people buy it, well, I'm probably doing a good job somewhere. Marketing it, the course is probably awesome, so other people are talking about it. So it is cool that in this world, when you do your own thing, the more you make is usually a reflection of you doing something right. Now, that's to say you can make an awesome course and make no money, but then you're doing something wrong. It's probably the marketing, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's not a marketing podcast, so we don't have to get into all that. But as far as making money with podcasting, I take a little bit of a different approach to it. So in the beginning, a lot of people figure, all right, I'm going to make money with sponsors. And it's same as when people get into blogging. And when I got into blogging 8 years ago, I thought, okay, I'll just put these like banner ads on the side, Google ads, and that's how I'll make money. Quickly realized you need a ton of traffic to make any type of money. And it was just kind of a crappy way to make money because all you were going after was like numbers, right? It didn't matter if my stuff was good. It was like, okay, if I'm just getting more people to come here, you kind of just get on that hamster wheel. So what I realized is usually you have to create a product. And so with podcasting, I look at it in a similar way. Now, I am happy to say that I do have sponsors for my podcast, but that was a long time coming. And it's also, we've grown a pretty substantial audience now. And even that being said, the podcast sponsorship isn't our biggest moneymaker. So even if you grow a pretty big podcast, sponsorship is, if you rely just on that, would be very hard for you to make a decent living just on sponsorship. Again, I talked about Joe Rogan. There's probably honestly 50 podcasts out there that can make a substantial amount straight sponsors because you just need so many people listening. So sponsorship is what most people think. The better way to do it is to think of podcasting as a marketing arm for your business. And when I say business, that usually means you have to have a way to make money. One of the easiest ways to make money, if you're a teacher and your podcast is helping people learn a skill or something that they didn't know before, the easiest way is to have an online course. And so for us, when I look at my podcast, I say, okay, this is a way to get people in the door, to get them to know about me, my site, my podcast, my personality, everything, to get them to build to get me to build trust and loyalty in those people. A totally free way. They don't pay to listen to podcasts, so it's totally free. But if they like what I'm doing, then I sit there and say, all right, well, I can make money off these people. And that's not meant in a sleazy way. It's like these people can pay me in certain ways. One, we have an online course about how to use frequent flyer miles, so they could buy my frequent flyer bootcamp. They could join our community, Location Indie. So if they're like, oh man, I really want to learn how to be location independent, cool. You listen to my podcast enough, you know that I run a community that you pay monthly for that's called Location Indie.
We'll put that in the show notes for anybody who's interested.
There we go. Yeah, we'll throw it in the show notes for you guys. 3, we have an app called Jetto. It's a free app, but there's a premium version of it if you want to get even more cheap flights. So when I look at someone coming in the door of my podcast, I say, yeah, I might make money from sponsorship here or there, but you've come into the door and now I've given you all these other options that could feasibly make me money down the road. And it hasn't cost me anything other than what it cost me to produce the podcast. And so I like to think of it as a marketing arm because, again, if one person listens to podcasts or 100,000 people listen to podcasts, it doesn't cost me any more. Yet, if we get a lot of people in, obviously I'm going to make money from those other things. So I look at it as sponsorship, totally secondary. Most important thing is getting them in, getting them to trust you, getting them to like you, and then offering them something that they're asking for. People who listen to my podcast want to know about frequent flyer miles. Hey, you really want to know about it? You want to dive really deep and do crazy stuff like 3 vacations for the price of 1 and how to fly to Bali and then over to India and then back to Japan and across the US and have it be the same cost as if you took one flight? Cool. Get the boot camp because that's where we dive really, really deep.
How did you find that out? Because when you started off your podcast, that wasn't your, I'm going to make a boot camp after my 100th episode. That wasn't like your plan on the first day, right? So how did you figure that out?
I wish I wish I had the plan that I have now. I could have gotten there a lot quicker than 7 or 8 years. I started the podcast because I saw it as a hobby and I just wanted to, again, connect with people who and give them an opportunity to tell their story because I wanted to be told and to build these bonds with the guest. I didn't really ever envision it would be the main part of our business when I started. But what I did realize was after we started the podcast and, maybe a year in, I was like, man, like when we get emails, even though at that point we had less podcast listeners than blog visitors, and now we have more podcast listeners than blog visitors. But at that point, I was like, why are we getting so many emails from podcast listeners than readers? We have more readers. It was because they were so much more engaged. And so I just realized, wow, this is a way to create a connection that's deeper than just from written content. And so I didn't say, well, when I hit this podcast number, I'm going to start a course. But I looked at my business as a whole. And actually, a buddy helped me, and he was like, dude, you're not going to be able to keep doing this if you don't make money. He actually said to me, stop writing blogs, stop recording podcasts until you find a way that people can pay you. Because I was like middling along in that idea, like you said, like, I'm making $1,500 a month. I'm working 60, 70 hours a week. Like, and he was just like, you have to focus on the money. And in 3 days, I whipped up the first version of my frequent flyer boot camp because I said, wait, people are asking me for this advice. I'm teaching them how to do it, but it's not in a super systematic, clear, convenient way. That's why people pay for education and courses, right? Mm-hmm. It's convenient, and it's like faster than if you went through all 300 posts on my site. And so I'm like, all right, let me see if people will pay me for this information. And that was, 6 years ago. And, now the course has gotten bigger and more robust. But I just knew from my perspective, I have people coming in the door, listening to the podcast and reading the blog, but they don't really have any way to give me money. I need to figure out a way to monetize this. And so a course was the easiest way for sure.
So one of the things, speaking about monetizing it, one of the things that I've heard a lot of teachers say, they feel guilty asking for money to teach because they would do it for free if they didn't need to eat. Did you feel the same way? And if you did, How did you get over it? What did you do to get over that guilt almost of asking somebody for your knowledge, asking somebody for money for your knowledge?
My back was against the wall when I got over the guilt. And I probably didn't get over the guilt completely in one straight shot, but the first time I was like, man, I'm going to create this course and ask people for money. I was making, like $1,000, $1,500 a month. We were married. We had just moved back from Japan, and it wasn't really working. And we were living with my parents again, and we were trying to move out. And I'm like, if I don't make money, I am going to have to go back to a teaching job. And if I do that, so I thought of it like that. All right, I'm going to have to go back to a full-time job, teaching or otherwise, right? And if I do that, then I'm going to have way less time to create this podcast and this blog. And so these people who are getting all this information for free from me and are really, I saw that they were using it to travel and enjoying it. I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to create it for them. So my buddy was like, find a way to make money, because he said in a month or two, you're going to have to go back and get a job anyway. So either they pay you for this, or you go back and get a job, and then they're not getting it from you at all, or they're getting it in short spurts because you're doing it like an hour a day or something like that. And so I just came to realize that in order for me to do it, in order for me to give the wisdom that I had and the knowledge that I had, I needed to get people to pay for it. And what I quickly realized is that people are willing to do that. And so if anyone is feeling guilty, just look around and say like, hey, did someone give you free college? Like, did someone say, you might have got a scholarship, but you work for it. Was someone like, I feel really guilty, so I'm going to open this college. It's going to be totally free. Anyone can come and learn from me. No, because how are they going to pay the professors? How are they going to have the building? How are they going to do all that? You paid because you said, I know at the end of 4 years, it's going to be worth it. You don't walk into a store and grab clothes off the rack, be like, cool, I need a new t-shirt, and walk out the door, because you're saying there's value to this. And so if what you're providing is valuable, you feel guilty because maybe you wouldn't pay for that knowledge because you already know it, but someone else is going to pay for it. And you've probably paid for something that you found valuable as well. And I think that's where the issue is that you're sitting there saying, I was sitting there saying, no one's going to pay to learn how to use frequent flyer miles because it's so easy. Well, it was easy to me because I knew how to do it. In fact, it was way hard for a lot of people, and that's why they were coming to my site. So that's what you have to understand, is that you are not your ideal customer because you already know the content. And so you might not pay for it, but someone else is. You're solving someone else's problem, and they're willingly going to give you money if you solve their problem.
You bring up an awesome point. People don't feel guilty paying $100 for jeans, but they feel guilty, or somebody feels guilty charging $100 for a course. What do you think is going to benefit the life of that person better? Their $100 jeans, or that amazing $100 course that you, whoever you are, produced and gave it to them and probably made their life better some way? Whether your course is on nutrition, on language, on travel, it doesn't matter. For $100, you just made somebody's life better. And it's probably much more valuable than $100, even $1,000. There's $3,000 courses out there. But the people who take those, the ones that are successful, they feel like they got a lot more than $3,000 worth of value out of them. Otherwise, like 100 people, you can convince 100 people to do it because you have good marketing. But as soon as the rumors get out that that's not worth what people paid, it's simply not going to work.
Yeah. So, and if you are a teacher, I just want to hit this point, because if you are a teacher that means you're probably better at teaching, because that's what you've been doing, than most other people out there. And so I almost see it as a responsibility. Like, I know I'm an awesome teacher. Not, there are better teachers out there, I'm sure. But I know I've come from a teaching background. I've now taught online. I taught in schools. Like, one of my skill sets is being a teacher, breaking down complicated things into step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, because that's how I like to learn. And so I know I'm a really good teacher. I have a responsibility if someone is looking to want to travel more, and this is going to change their life, or they're looking to start their own online business, and it's going to change their life, which it will if they do it. Do I want to send them to someone who might know how to do it? They might know how to start an online business, but they don't know how to teach someone else. No, I want them to come to me because I'm saying, hey, I know how to teach you this in a really easy to understand manner, and I've done it myself. So it's a responsibility for me to help those people out. And so if I'm not doing that, there's a lot of people out there who are not going to be able to get that value. And so in the beginning, you probably are not going to feel that way. It took me a long while to feel that way. But once you start seeing people take your course and you start seeing people come out on the other end and say, wow, this is amazing, you realize that if they hadn't come to you, they might have went to a way worse teacher and failed, or they might have just given up because there was no one teaching it that could do it in a way that resonated with them. And then they're still stuck in their cubicle job, or they're not traveling the way they want to.
That's exactly it, Trev. You are the anomaly that we want everybody listening to this podcast to become, because in our experience, teachers generally don't know how to entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs don't know how to teach. We want to teach both sides how to do it, bring them together, and then you guys can be successful online podcasters / teachers like Travis is over there. Hey there, Anomalies. Ray here. I hope you're enjoying this interview. This is just a short reminder that if you like what you're hearing on the Anomalous Educator, you should subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. That way you won't miss any of our weekly episodes. If you have time to take that extra step, you can leave a review for me as well. If you prefer to tell me directly what you think of the show, just go to the website anomalouseducator.com. That's ANOMALOUSEDUCATOR.com. Yeah, it's a mouthful. And you can email me directly through our Contact Us page. Thanks in advance. Now, back to the show. So we're running out of time. And I know you have a much more free-form podcast, but on us, we'll try to keep them to their commute. So I'd like to end with one question so that everybody who's listening to this podcast can come away and do something today to improve their life. That is part of teaching. So if you could tell everybody one piece of actionable advice that they can use today to start a podcast and kind of get their education online, what would that be?
Yeah, if you want to start a podcast, probably there's two. I'm going to give you two because I'm a teacher. I'm just going to break the rules.
We have a bonus here today.
Yeah, a bonus. First, go out and buy a microphone. Honestly, this mic that I've been using for 7 or 8 years has traveled to, 50 countries, been all over the world. This thing is basically indestructible. It's actually not that expensive. It's called an Audio-Technica ATR 2100 USB microphone.
That's actually what I'm using on my end as well. So
yeah, I have recommended this to thousands of people, and you can still, when I bought it, it was like $25 on Amazon, and now I think it's like $60 or $70. But I've tried a lot of awesome mics, and there's some really amazing ones like for studios that might be a tiny bit better, $1,000, stuff like that. You don't need that. Get a mic and just have that, because that's going to make it real, right? You have a microphone. The second thing that I would do is I would sit down and I would outline, if I were you, what you like in podcasts that you've listened to, and start to flesh out what the body of your show will be. So for example, if you love interviews, sit there and say, all right, I want to interview other people. What is like the main theme that I like to interview on, and who are some guests? So maybe that's your outline. Pick your first 10 guests. If you're going to do a show where it's you and a co-host and you don't have other guests on, outline what are your first 10 episodes going to be? Okay, what are the topics that you're going to cover? If it's just you on a podcast, which is pretty hard, but some people do it, again, what are your first 10 shows going to be? So sit down and make an outline, and I think 10 is good, of what it looks like. Like, what would your show actually look like if you had 10 shows under your belt? And figure that out, because that's going to, you're not going to hit it right away. Your voice is not going to be awesome. If I go and listen to my old interviews, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so slow. And like, you can tell you're thinking about everything. It's not going to be perfect, but you're sitting there and saying, this is what my ideal is. And so I think if you start outlining it, you're going to get super excited about it, because if you're a teacher, you're usually pretty curious. And this is another way, another outlet, another medium for you to learn about and get curious about and to put out in the world. So yeah, get a microphone and then outline your first 10 shows. Just brain dump. You don't have to edit anything out. You don't have to be perfect. Just like, what do you think you would like to do for a show? Start writing it down.
Amazing advice. And if anybody does this when they're listening to this, after listening to this podcast, please go into the comments below this podcast on our page and let us know what the ideas you came up with. I'd be thrilled to see what you guys are doing and kind of see all the inspiration that comes out of this episode. So if people want to contact you directly, Trav, where can they find you? I know obviously on iTunes, but where else can they find you?
Yeah. So the best ways to find out everything that we do, if you go to extrapackofpeanuts.com, that is like a hub for everything that we're doing there. If you want to reach out to me personally, you could do that Twitter, Instagram @packofpeanuts. My email is on the website, so you can find that as well. And that will also have links, obviously, to the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast right now, you want to find it right away without going to the website. It's just Extra Pack of Peanuts Travel Podcast. So yeah, everything is revolving around that extrapackofpeanuts.com domain. You can find everything that we do, from the boot camp to the podcast to the Location Indie to the app. Just go there. You'll find it pretty quickly.
Awesome. And actually, that leaves just one final question. Why is it called the Extra Pack of Peanuts?
So I will keep this short because we're not a super free-flowing podcast here. When I was younger, I hated flying. And, we're talking like when I was like 6 to 14. I still don't love it, but I hated it then. And every time, the only thing I liked about taking flights is I get on a flight and they'd bring around those little packs of peanuts, and they would, when they gave me one, I'd say, thanks. Like, do you mind if I get a second? And they give me a second, of course, without thinking. And I remember in my little 8-year-old brain thinking, oh my gosh, I just got 2 packs of peanuts. Everyone else only got one. I'm like gaming the system here, right? And then now that's kind of a metaphor for then us, once I learned about travel hacking using frequent flyer miles, how to travel cheap, I might be sitting on a flight and I paid $5 to get on that flight, and someone else might have paid $5,000 or $500, whatever. And now I'm really sitting there saying like, yeah, I really did game the system. This isn't just an extra pack of peanuts I'm getting away with. Now I'm getting to travel around the world for like pennies on the dollar. And so just a bit of an extended metaphor from that experience when I was a kid.
And I bet you're still getting that extra pack of peanuts as well whenever you get on a plane.
Let's give peanuts out, but whatever they're giving out, I always ask for an extra one for sure.
Nice. Well, Travis, it was a pleasure and an honor to have you on the Anomalous Educator podcast. I'm sure all of the listeners learned a ton from you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. I'm coming down to see you in Mexico again. It's too nice down there not to come back down.
I got to move.
Thanks for having me on, Ray.
Thanks, Rev. And that's it for our show. I hope you enjoyed this chat with the podcast phenom, Travis Sherry. If you're looking for another inspirational story about a teacher who broke their shackles and made the move online, check out my interview with the YouTube star and English teacher, Gabby Wallace, in episode 1. If you're enjoying the Anomalous Educator podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. In our next episode, we're going to be talking to Ronsley Voss, who's going to walk us through how to find your own personal voice in a crowded online world. Talk to y'all next week.